For a while, I already came to the conclusion that we don't have to play being a prophet. I don't know what it will be. I know what we can make. I know how we can design our future. Today, together with my colleagues and perhaps many other Jewish communities around Europe,
we all want a future. It's very easy to say there is no future and everyone just leave Europe. I don't think that this is what is best for Europe. I don't think that is what is best for Jews and for non-Jews. This is a future that we need to build together.
We're working on a strategy. We call it the Atid strategy. Atid means future in Hebrew. We want to put in place certain projects, research, to understand what is needed to have a prosperous Jewish life for the next 100 years. We want to plant the seeds today for the next 100 years of Jewish life in Europe.
This is something that we need to make sure that all Jews feel safe in Europe. We need to make sure that this fight is not just for Jews to make sure for their own future in Europe, but I think that we need allies, and that's why we need both Jews and non-Jews to work together to build a sustainable future for Jews in Europe.
Well, the European Commission has made the aim to have a future for a flourishing Jewish life at the center of our EU strategy that we adopted in 2021. In fact, the strategy itself is called Combating Antisemitism and Fostering Jewish Life, because all the actions that we do, whether it is addressing antisemitism online, making sure that we have good data, ensuring that there is security for Jews, making sure that we remember the Holocaust and that we find new ways in remembering the Holocaust now that we have less and less survivors with us. As we say in the strategy, Jewish life can prosper, and we know that Europe can only prosper if Jewish life prospers too.
Jewish life has roots in Europe for 2,000 years. I think one of the biggest challenges that the Jewish community faces today is the legitimacy of our history. We know that Jewish culture has in its DNA that relentless will to build and rebuild. There should be a future for Jewish life in Europe.
I think what we've seen this year is that Jewishans do not feel safe to come on campuses. Something that is just a basic right is to study, to gain knowledge is a big step for some of them. They've been bullied, they've been harassed, they've been beaten up also, unfortunately. And we saw also this growing trend of violence on campuses. At first it was just word, but then we also saw that it became more and more violent, especially after the encampment started in the US and then it was imported in Europe.
You have been the EU coordinator on combating anti-Semitism, fostering Jewish life for already 9 years. What has changed since then?
So first, when I started in 2015, I reached out to the Jewish communities in order to listen and to really hear from them what their challenges were, and I think also for us as European Commission to know in more detail how anti-Semitism really impacted on their daily lives. And this was important for us in order to then develop the strategy, which was fully based on these responses. Now what we have seen, and that's I think very positive, is that the awareness among member states, among the European Commission, among European institutions about anti-Semitism being a threat to the Jews and being a threat also to democracy, to our security, has significantly increased, and therefore also action has increased. So, for example, as one of the suggestions we made in our strategy to have national strategies on combating anti-Semitism and to implement those with special envoys being appointed on national level, there is a point to go to for the Jewish community, and there's also someone who coordinates government actions on a national level. And therefore, I think slowly the actions, the 96 actions that we have proposed and are implementing, are trickling down into national, regional, local level. Because in the end, if we want to see change for the Jews, the local level has to change. We have now the Digital Services Act, which addresses hate speech online. We are also looking into addressing anti-Semitism through education. We have national trainings now for those who make the education policy, to make the curricula, and also directors of schools for them to recognize anti-Semitism and to acknowledge it.
We are in a very different world. We all talk about raising anti-Semitism. For me, it means that when I'm walking with my kids in the street, very often we are insulted, and very often our boys of 16, 17 or 13-year-old, they're being harassed and physically attacked, them and their friends. It happened many times, not once. It's not an anecdote that we tell, but it happens. It's a recurrent problem. After October 7th, we went back to the wild Middle Ages. That's the feeling I have today.
It's very interesting because what I've seen the past year is that we have a lot of allies. We have a silent majority that is pro-Jewish life in Europe, that is pro-Israel in the sense that Israel has the right to defend itself. For the silent majority, most of it to wake up, the rest of the society as well.
I've noticed that people who come out and insult or attack Jews, in their delusion, they believe that they are protecting innocent people, they are protecting children in Gaza. Today, in a free society, we are responsible for each other. So if we live in Brussels, for example, or in Europe, anywhere in Europe we find ourselves, we are here neighbors, and we are the guardians of the freedoms of each other.
If everyone signed up for tolerant Europe, welcoming Europe, I would say.
We see the highest level of anti-Semitism since the Shoah. We see that Jews live in fear, which is painful and which really is something we never thought we would see again. We are determined to ensure that Jews have a future here and to create the environment in which it is possible.
Christian communities play a very important role, especially after 7 October. Friendship that we sense in difficult times, it was very meaningful to want to know that we're not alone in the world, that there are people that can still hold some common sense. Today, in today's world, the Jewish community faces a lot of threats from many factions of society, especially from the far left, because the way they are expressing themselves with open anti-Semitism. And many times I even heard the expressions anti-Jewish. Sorry, this is not acceptable. In times that there's so much obsession of ideologies, when you see a bit of coherence and humanity, it shines in the dark. So I think the duty of those today who hold common sense and Christian values, I call them also European values, I think it's our duty for the next generations. Today we have to plant the tree of coexistence for tomorrow.
So with regards to anti-Semitism, I think there are a lot of challenges that we need to address. We adopted recently so-called global guidelines on combating anti-Semitism, which have been signed by 40 countries by now, which give an outline of what we think needs to happen. One is, for example, to call out anti-Semitism in a more systematic way. This has to be done by politicians, but in particular, I think it has to be done also by people in their everyday life. When you are in a school reunion or you are in a sports club and you hear anti-Semitic remarks, it's important to address it. For this, the so-called IRA definition would be a good reference point to recognize whether a remark is anti-Semitic or not. The European Commission has targeted online anti-Semitism. We saw that this was a huge issue after the 7th of October, introduced so-called infringement procedures against those companies, like, for example, Twitter, Meta and others, who have not dealt with this content properly. Then it will be important to make sure that security for the Jewish communities is sufficient. We ourselves as Commission are now introducing 5 million additional funding under the Security Fund for Jewish premises, but in the end it's for the member states to ensure that their citizens, just like any other citizens, are safe and feel safe. Feeling safe is a prerequisite for Jewish life. And if we want Jewish life to flourish, we have to make sure that the conditions are there.